Hey, what's up? Welcome to another spider video. Today we're going to jump in Illustrator, take a look at creating our own custom brush, using it to make a shape that we can bring over to Cinema 4D and hopefully make something cool out of it. So let's jump in and take a look.
All right, so here we are. We're going to jump right in. I'm going to try not to make this too long, but let's see how it goes. We're going to start in Illustrator. I've got my canvas open. I'm working at 6K right now, only because when I go into Cinema with textures or splines or shapes, I like to work a little bigger. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I know that you can't see the menu up here outside the record window, but I'm basically going under View, and I'm going to turn on the Show Grid. It's just going to help me visually line things up as I start to lay shapes down. So I'm also going to go back under View and turn on Snap to Grid, just to help me be a little bit more precise as I lay things down, because you'll see with that on, it's basically going to try to snap to these division lines. So we'll do that. I'm going to Option Shift drag to clone that same shape out, and then I'll use Command D for duplicate, do a couple more. All right. And you'll see that there's really no preset design or idea in mind here with what I'm doing. I am literally just laying stuff out randomly and seeing if anything kind of looks cool. So we're just going to do a little bit of that and just keep going and see what we come up with. It's surprising how quickly things can start to take shape and look interesting when you're just randomly laying things out with no real design in mind. So let's see, I'm going to hold Shift so I get a perfect square. Then I'm going to use one of these handles to round my corner. I'll use my pen tool to add another point there, and I'll drag this guy out just so we get a shape like that. It's a little bit more interesting. Maybe I'll move him down here actually. I'll clone him over, but maybe I'll make this one a smaller version of that. I'm going to create a little hole in this shape by overlapping another shape on top of it like that. When I do that and I select both, I can use my Pathfinder tool here. This one right here, minus, it's basically going to subtract the top shape from the main bottom shape. So like that. So now this is literally a hole. There's nothing there to grab. So all right, so we've got that. Maybe I'll do the same thing to the smaller version like that. And I'll do the same subtraction. Okay, so maybe I'll clone this guy up here, and we'll duplicate him a couple times. You know what? Let's zoom in and let's make a couple of these shorter than the others. And we'll do the same thing up here. You know, again, just to break things up a little bit. So maybe we'll do ones like this. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I actually want to drag him over. All right, and maybe we'll then go in and add some even smaller ones, like little guys like that. And we'll clone these over and down, and then maybe we'll just start deleting some so it looks a little more random. Something like that. Okay, so we've got that going for us. Let's do some other kinds of shapes up here. And I'll just drag these guys over to make a diagonal little rectangle, or a slanted one, I should say. Let's do another thin line up here. Maybe add a little bit more to it like that. All right, so let's see what we got here. You know what? Let's grab a couple of these and we'll shorten these as well. Just, oops. That's not what I wanted to do. All right. Why not? Okay, so let's grab this group again, copy and paste it, And we'll bring them over here. Maybe I'll rotate it, holding shift to get that 45 and 90 degree snap, just like that. And then we'll clone this group over. Try that one more time. There. All right, maybe we get rid of one more of these guys. Okay, so let's see, we're starting to get something going here. Maybe we just need a little bit more. Let's move him over and take some of these, and we'll turn them 90 degrees, bring them here. Maybe I'll take these guys, bring them over, do something like that, and then maybe we'll make a longer piece here. Okay, so let's keep going and finish this real quick and get to more interesting things. So I'm just going to make some more lines. And these are just going to be more random, just because it makes for interesting extrusions later. So let's do that. All right, so you know what? Let's go ahead and say that this is our brush, okay? Let's say that we're happy with this. So before we turn it into a brush, there's one thing we want to do. We want to merge all of the overlapping shapes. It'll just play nicer with Cinema when it's trying to extrude. If we don't have shapes like this that are touching, but they're actually two separate pieces, Cinema's not going to like that so much. So we're going to go ahead and under our Pathfinder, we're going to use our Unite option here. So watch what happens up here to this line. It's going to merge them together so that now this is one shape, right? And actually this whole entire element now is one shape. It merged everything together. So with that, we can go ahead and realign everything to the center of our canvas like that, and we can turn it into a brush. So I'm going to open up the brushes palette. I'm going to grab our shape, drag it in. We'll get the plus sign there. I'm going to let go. It'll open up this little box. We want to say a new art brush. Hit OK. The orientation of this brush right now is set to left to right, and that's controlled by these directional arrows here. I'm going to go ahead and leave it left to right because I want it that way. We'll name it Tech Brush, and we're going to leave stretch to fit stroke length, essentially saying that whatever shape I apply it to or whatever path I draw out, this brush will stretch to fit that shape or that path. So that's good. We want to leave that. So you'll see that it popped up in here now. It's now a brush. So if I go ahead and delete our shape here, I'm going to grab a ellipse tool and just hold shift to draw a perfect circle. I'm going to turn off the fill because we can get a better idea of what the brush is doing on the edges. So with that still selected, I'm going to apply our brush. And so now we get something that looks like this. So you can see immediately that the more complex you make your shape to begin with, the more interesting and complex and dense these new shapes can become using that brush. So, but this is fine. Let's call this good. We're going to bring this into Illustrator or into Cinema now. We can't bring the brush straight over, so we actually need to reverse engineer this at this point. We started out making the shape, we turned it into a brush, then we used that brush to make this circular pattern. Now we're going to turn the circular pattern back into a shape. So we're going to do that by highlighting this shape and going under Object up here, going down to Expand Appearance. And now you can tell by the blue outlines that this is no longer a brush stroke. This is now a shape again, and it's made up of all of these points. So at this point, we can bring this into Cinema. So let's do that. I'm going to save this out, and we're just going to call it our Tech Brush again. And when I go to save this, you're going to see it's going to try to save it in the current version of Illustrator that you're using, but Cinema will not see these versions. I'm using CC 2017 right now. Cinema will not see any of these Illustrator versions except for Illustrator 8. So you actually have to back save to Illustrator 8. You'll get flagged with this little warning, but we're not going to worry about that for what we're doing. So let's go ahead and hide Illustrator. We're done in there. And I'm going to bring up Cinema, and here's our 3D landscape. Nothing's in here. So once we're in here, I'm going to go to File, Merge, and I'm going to bring in our Tech Brush that we just saved out. and we're going to get this option. Usually it defaults to something that looks like this, where Connect Splines is checked. And typically this would work out fine for what you're bringing in, but you'll see that for what we're doing, it's not going to work out that great. And I'll show you why. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it in like that. The first thing we want to do is recenter to the 3D world position here, because the 0 position in Cinema is different than the one in Illustrator. So let's go under coordinates, and we'll basically 0 our coordinates back out. And there's our shape, which already looks cool in our 3D perspective here. So there you go. That's how easy that was. So let's go ahead and let me extrude this, and I want to show you what happens with our option to keep the connected splines, why that wasn't the best choice. So I'm going to grab our extrude tool. I'm going to throw our brush into it. With extrude highlighted, I'm going to go under object and click this hierarchy button, or hierarchical, whatever. I can't even say that. So I'm going to check it, and right away we have an extrusion now. Our shape is no longer a flat graphic. It's now got some depth. But look what happened to our shapes up here. If I turn this back off, these were meant to be spaces or holes in these shapes, and like up here. But with the extrude on, it ignores that. And that's not what we want, because if we're going to design it to be a certain way, we want Cinema to respect that, right? So let me show you why that was. I'm going to delete that, and we're going to backtrack a little bit. I'm going to bring it back in, grab our tech brush, and this time I'm going to uncheck Connect Splines. I'm going to leave Group Splines, because that's actually okay. That's going to help us, but I'm going to take off Connect Splines. I'm going to bring it in again. So once again, we're going to 0 out the coordinates to get to the 0 world position in Cinema. And here's our shapes, right? So if I add extrude now, you're going to see that it's still not going to work. So there it is. I'm going to do the hierarchy button, and it still ignored those and flattened everything. And the reason for that is because we need to connect these groupings. So remember, we left group splines on, and that's what these are. It basically grouped those overlapping shapes, like this guy up here. Whatever was overlapping, it grouped them together. So if we click through, you'll see that these are our groups. So what we want to do now is basically tell Cinema to join these 2 overlapping paths together and treat them as a shape, but respecting that empty space. So we can go down to Connect Objects and Delete. Basically what that did, it added the 2 splines together and deleted the originals. So that's why we do the Connect and Delete option there. So I'm going to go through and do that to all of these. Connect and delete, and select them, connect and delete. This guy is next. Okay, let's do this one. Okay, and I think that might be the last one, but let's take a quick scan through. We'll look for any more groupings that got put together. I don't see any. So okay, we should be good to go now. So if I turn extrude back on, now it respects the holes. It leaves them in there. So that's why we want to do it that way. All right, so now that we've got this extruded, we can start to exaggerate this extrusion and come up with something that starts to look a little beefier. You know, not such a whimsy flat graphic. Now it actually has some depth and some weight to it. So one other thing we want to do before we start lighting and texturing, we want to get the most out of that lighting and texturing, and what helps that a lot is specular highlights and specular reflections. We won't get any of that right now on these edges, because these edges are just straight, and so they won't pick up any of that specular light. So with our extrusion under our caps, we're going to fillet the caps, or fillet the caps. I don't know how you say that, but however you want to say it. So right now you can already start to see that now we're getting these little highlights on the edges, these little rounded edges. We can add a little more detail in there if we wanted to, just to make them a little nicer. Maybe we'll lessen this. So if I zoom back out, it already starts to look much nicer, just being able to pick up those edges, right? So okay, So let's move on to the next step here. Now it looks cool, it's extruded, but it's still flat. Everything's even, everything's on the same level plane. We want to make that a little bit more unorganized or abstract, because it'll play with light better and casting shadows and things. So in order to do that, I'm going to grab another tool under MoGraph here. I'm going to use our fracture object. And essentially what fracture is going to do, or what it's going to tell the extrude to do, is to separate all of these individual shapes and treat them as individual shapes. And you'll see what I mean. So if I drag this under fracture, okay, and then all we want to do is come under object here. We want to explode segments and connect. And the reason we want to do that, it's different than explode segments, is it's basically going to go ahead and separate these shapes, but then it's going to keep these shapes intact as objects. Whereas if I just did explode segments, it would basically shatter everything apart. And let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to do explode segments first, and then we'll grab something like random and watch what happens to it. So see that? It's basically shattering everything, all the little edges, all the sides, and depending on what you're trying to do, that may be an effect you want, but that's not the effect we want. Because if I exaggerate this, you'll see everything is just shattered into pieces, and that is not what we're after. So I'm going to delete that guy. So go back to fracture. I'm going to say explode segments and connect. So now if I were to add that random again, see, it moved the pieces, but the pieces are still intact. They're still chunks. They're not shattered. And so if I were to zero X and Y out and just affect the Z, you see what it's doing? So right there, that's already more interesting than what we were looking at. So with that, let's go ahead and take a step back. I'm going to get rid of random. Let's do something else here real quick. So I am going to turn off fracture. I'm going to duplicate this whole structure. Okay, Control, drag it, make another copy of it. And what I'm going to do is take this version. Actually, let's go ahead and turn this off and this. Yeah, okay. So we're going to go to our front view, and I'm going to scale down this copy so that it fits nicely inside our original. I'm going to turn this maybe 90 degrees and then just kind of position it so it looks like it's kind of in the center here, and I want it to fit nice and snug in there. So let's make it a little smaller. Okay, so that's good. Let's come back out, go back to our perspective view. Okay, so that's what we have now. We just have a duplicate of our same shape, just rotate it and scale down. All right, so once we have that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn these guys back on. All right, let's add a random effect with this guy first. So we're going to say random. Okay, we're going to leave X and Y where they are, and we're going to exaggerate this guy negatively like that. Okay, so now we're getting something that looks like that. All right, so then if we turn on our secondary or original shape, we're going to add a random to him as well. All right, we're going to zero out X and Y. And we'll do something like that, but we're going to push this back. So maybe we're going to do that. Okay. So it looks like the center is a little bit more elevated than the outside edges. And then let's reposition our view. And we'll get more like this. And maybe we'll lessen this guy. And just close a little bit of that. Okay. Something like that, let's say. That could be kind of cool. All right. So let's say we like where we're at there. One more thing I want to do. I want to add a floor plane, and I'm going to do that with a tube actually, because I want to leave a hole in the center of our mechanism. So let's go back to our front view, and I'm going to start stretching this guy out. We'll bring the outer radius out there, inner, we'll go, maybe that's too much, so let's try 500. Okay, let's try to line him up as best we can, because essentially what we want is an opening in our center area here of the mechanism. Everything else we want to feel like it's closed off. It's a closed floor. So let's see what that's looking like. Okay, we'll push him back. Maybe something like that. Okay, we can bring out the radius a little more. There, that way we closed off that corner there. All right, so let's say we like something like that. Let's add a light. I'm going to add a spotlight with this, and I'll show you why. Right now it's facing in the wrong direction, so let's turn our light around. There's our light, and we're going to basically rotate it 180 degrees like that. We're going to make it a visible light, so visible light volumetric, and then we can pull this out and widen it. So now that light is showing through our hole here. So let's just take a quick look at what that's doing. So there's our light, and it's coming through the hole in our floor. Okay, we can't really see anything else because our mechanism is it's in black. There's no light on it. So let's start texturing and lighting that guy. So what I'm going to do, I have a metal texture already created here. So I'm going to throw that on our two objects like that. So you can see it's already showing us a representation of how reflective the material is. But we're going to need a sky or something for it to reflect, because right now it's not reflecting anything. So if I were to take another preview, it'd pretty much just be in black again. Although now we're starting to see some detail in our light here, which is already looking cooler than it was. See, that's already looking kind of cool. But let's turn on shadows. We'll just do soft maps. Okay, then we're going to add a sky element. This is what's going to reflect into our mechanism here. So with our sky, I'm going to turn it off in the viewport here. I'm going to add a compositing tag. All we want is a reflection, so I don't want it to cast or receive shadows. I don't want the camera to see the sky. I just want reflection to see it. So I'm going to leave that checked. I'm going to grab my sky material here and throw it on my sky. So let's see what that's doing. All right, so now that's starting to look pretty beefy, right? We got some cool reflections going on, starting to look like it's got some weight to it, like a heavy object. So that's cool. All right, so let's just color our light. Maybe we don't want our light to just be pure white like that. Let's give it a little character. So we'll throw a little blue into it, and maybe we'll brighten it up. Let's say 150. Let's see what that's going to do. All right, so there's our light with a little bit of color in it. Adds a little something. So maybe we're a little too reflective. So we can always, we can kind of mess with that texture. We could noodle it forever. If you find the right kind of reflection and specular strength you want. I don't want to spend too much time doing that, because there is one more step to all this I want to show you before we end this tutorial. And that's to render this out and bring it into After Effects, just to add a little bit of coloring and atmospherics, things like that. Let's render this out just as a still. So we're just going to say current frame, 1920 by 1080. That's all good. We'll leave ambient occlusion on. Since this is a still, let's do a cubic still image. This will be good. Yeah. All right, let's save this out. I'm just going to save it as a JPEG, and we'll put it right into our folder here. Maybe I'll just make an renders folder, and I'll just call it HUD. It's our HUD. All right, and let's render that. All right, so there's our rendered piece.
just again, just a still frame. We've got our light going, we've got our texture, got our speculars on this side. So let's bring it into After Effects. I want to show you just a couple things we can do. All right, we're up in After Effects now. All right, so let's go ahead and find our render here. So we put him in this new renders folder. Let's grab our HUD, bring him in. We'll drop him into a new composition. That'll bring us up right here in the window. I'm going to do a fit just so I can see the whole thing. Okay, so there's our guy. So what can we do to this thing just to plus him out a little bit more? Well, one of the cool things I like to do is to add some shallow depth of field with a camera, or make it look like we have a shallow depth of field. So I'm going to do that by adding a new solid here, and we're going to make it white. Okay, so I'm actually going to turn it off so we can't see it, but it's still there, it's still active. And with that, I'm going to start drawing my field of vision, or my my little depth field here. So I do something like that, because let's say I want this to fall out of focus and I want this to fall out of focus, so that our main focus is this center area here. So obviously I'm faking it, but you know, that's the beauty of motion design. You fake things all the time, or at least I do. So let's see. Okay, I'm going to turn that back on. That's what that's doing. I'm going to feather it, something like that maybe, and we'll subtract it like that. So now, in theory, this should be in focus, and everything that falls into the white here would fall out of focus. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pre-compose this white frame. So let's do that here. Layer, pre-compose. Okay, and we'll call it our focus, or we'll call it our depth. Okay, we're going to move the attributes into a new composition. Hit OK. So there's our white. We can turn this off now. Okay. Now I'm going to add another white frame back in here. This one we're going to call our focus. And we're going to make this an adjustment layer by clicking this little icon here, right there. So now it's an adjustment layer. We can't see the white, but we can add effects to this layer which will affect everything underneath it. And what I mean by that is, with this highlighted, I'm going to go up to my effects palette here, blur, and I'm going to grab my camera lens blur. And you're going to see how everything just kind of got a little soft focus, right? So maybe I want to exaggerate that a little bit more. See how everything is out of focus now, like a camera lens. You'll notice the edge here, we're getting this little black ring or edge around our frame. What we want to do to get rid of that is repeat edge pixels on the blur, and that'll take that away. Okay, so everything's out of focus now, but we wanted our center to be in focus. That's where this depth layer comes in. On our effect here, we can tell it a blur map. We can designate a blur map layer. We're going to designate our depth, which is layer 1. When I do that, the center stays in focus, and you can see here we're falling out of focus. But it's kind of it's not exaggerated enough for me, so I'm going to exaggerate a little bit more. Maybe put a 15 on it. We can see it start to go out of focus here and here. I'm going to move our focus ring a little bit. So if I double click on depth, it'll bring me into this layer where I can then start to manipulate this guy. So I'm going to bring this in a little bit tighter, and I'm going to feather it a little bit more like that. So if we go back to our comp, now you can see what that's doing. It's adding this soft blur out here, leaving our center light in focus, which is what we want. So, okay, so let's say we like that. That part's good. Let's add some coloring. So I'm going to add another white frame, and I'm going to make it another adjustment layer. And this one is going to be our color grading, or color correction. So I'm going to cheat again. Rather than going and doing all this manually, I'm going to use a third-party plugin, Magic Bullet Looks, because they've already done all the hard work for us. So I'm going to go into here, and so now you can see we've got all these different colors, right? So if I want to see what something looks like, I just have to hover over it, and it will apply itself to our window here. So you can kind of scroll through. That one's a lot of contrast, kind of focuses our attention in on the light here when we do that. That's kind of cool too. So really, and they have different, that's enhancements. We can go under filters, and they have a whole other set of things. You really just find the one that you want, that you think looks good for the look you're going for. See, even something like that is pretty cool. Let's see. Again, it really depends on what it is you're looking to do. But let's say we liked that, right? So I'm going to do something else here. So we've added our focus, our shallow depth of field. We've added our color correction. Now I want to add a little bit of atmospherics, and to do that, I'm going to create another solid, and this one's going to be black. All right, so I'm going to put that in there, and on that black, I'm going to go under Effects to Trap Code, and I'm going to add some particular. Now, particular, if I solo this layer and I scroll through here, particular is just a particle system. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. So I don't want them to emit from the center here. I don't want that. I want not a point, but I want a box. And with that box, I'm going to make it the size of our frame, 1920 by 1080. All right, and maybe I'll do 2000 depth. 200, 2000. Okay, and we'll add some more particles, right? And if I go back to frame 1, they're going to start emitting from 0. I don't want that. So under emission extras, you can do a pre-run. And you can basically tell it, hey, act like you've already been emitting for 200 frames or whatever. So then you get this on frame 1. So that's good. So obviously those are way too big. If I do a screen on this layer, blending mode, oh, I have to unsolo it. That's what it looks like. A bunch of snow in our scene. That's not what we want. So under the particle size, I'm going to bring these down to like 0.5, let's say. Might be a little too small because now I don't see any of them. What does 1 look like? There we go. Okay, so one other thing I want to do though is I want to add some depth or camera blur to this also. And I'm going to go ahead and add a camera into our scene and enable depth of field. Okay, so we're going to do that. Now this camera is only going to affect our particles. I'm going to name that because these layers are not 3D. So if they're not 3D, the camera won't affect them, which we don't want it to, so that's good. I'm going to put our particles under our color correction though. So it gives a little bit of that goldish color, yellow, that it applied. Okay, so underneath our camera settings, camera options, we're going to we're going to play with our focus distance and our aperture to get it to do what we want. So I'm going to change our focus distance to that. You see it did something here. Let's go up to 90 on the aperture. And tell you what, let's solo this for now, just so it's easier to see. I'm going to exaggerate this. So it's doing something. Let's go down to particular, and let's widen our depth field, taking this to 5,000. Okay, so some things are going to fall out of focus there. Let's change our focus distance again. So you can see how some are going really out of focus, right? And some are staying in focus. And they actually look like they're getting larger because they're closer to the camera now. So let's turn everything back on. Let's make these smaller again. We don't want emission extras. Let's go 0.7. Okay, and let's add a bunch more. Let's go. All right, so I mean that's kind of think about it. We've taken it from this, this flat brush that we created ourselves in Illustrator just by drawing out some lines and rectangles and squares, brought it into Cinema, where we then extruded it and then brought it into After Effects, and we ended up with this kind of, you know, heavy machine HUD looking thing with a light coming out of it. So again, just abstract, messing around, coming up with cool visuals, good for daily renders and things like that, and good just to kind of play around and learn what different tools do and what you can come up with when you just think outside the box a little bit. So I hope you guys got something out of that. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it went a little longer than I originally planned. But again, let me know what you think. This is one of my first videos. Haven't done too many. So if you like it, I will do more. And if you want me to go back and take a little bit more time on the Illustrator side of things or even on the cinema side of things, let me know. All right. Thanks a lot.